Hello everyone and welcome to Bath Passion Purpose, a podcast by Dions. Today I have the pleasure to be in the Verve Ventures offices in Zurich, and I'm not sure if you can see the background, but you have a magnificent view of Zurich here. And for this podcast we're doing something very special. We have two guests. So I'm privileged to interview today the two co-founders of Verve Ventures, and I'm very grateful to have both Lukas and Steffen here with me. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. So let's kick it off. My first question to you is, how did you two meet?
Well, at work. So we actually met at a small consulting firm was a very small firm that we helped build up that was ultimately acquired by PwC. And we started our journey together there, and we knew that we could work together. That was kind of the starting point then.
And how many years ago was that?
More than a decade.
Probably quite a bit more, like 2007.
2007.
So we met in 2007. And how, after realizing that you work well with each other, how this dream or this whole new venture of let's build our own firm, and it's not just a startup, because as the founders, it is a startup in the beginning, but also go into the whole venture business. How did that come about?
Yeah. Well, we were employed, right? And we were serving big clients, in this case, financial services clients, banks, and so forth, to become more efficient, more productive, enter new markets, etc. But it wasn't our own, right? And we had very little impact in a way, and wanted to do something on our own that we controlled, that we could build more freely. And to do a venture capital firm actually had to do with the fact that we wanted to use technology to have a bigger impact than, venture firms that had been out there before. Actually, that's funny, because also the startups we prefer to invest in try to use technology, often complex technology, to do things fundamentally different and tackle problems in a different way. So in a way, we've done that too.
And I think one aspect that we also didn't like is we were an advisor. You're essentially selling your time. That means the impact you can have is always limited somewhere with the amount of time you put in. And of course, you can be more efficient. You can charge more by the hour, but it's never going to scale and have an impact on a different scale. So we always say we want to build something, a product, a service. Well, we looked at a lot of different things, right? And ultimately, this passion for technology was then the driver to actually go in that direction.
Yeah, I can relate to that, because when I became a lawyer, no one tells you about actually how the daily business looks like, which is big. And then when I realized, wait a minute, I can never, my productivity can never go more than 24 hours. That's all I can. And that makes absolutely no sense, because there's a cap on how much I create and produce.
Yeah.
And you said the technology was the driving force. When did you decide to actually create Verve Ventures? And I know it had before a different name, but we'll use Verve Ventures today. When did you have that courage? Because it takes a lot of courage to enter a market that's difficult, right? It's also in Switzerland, I think it's very different than being in Silicon Valley, where everybody, for example, thinks let's do it, let's try it, let's fail, and never mind. In Switzerland, people actually look at you and expect you to succeed. So where did you find that courage and start the initial days, going back to those?
Yeah, I think it was actually because we had a similar thought at the same time. So we had kind of this daily exchange on a lot of things, but then somehow this idea that, private markets is a place where a lot of value gets created, and everyone just brings their money to the stock exchange because that's where the infrastructure is to do it, right? And so I think both of us I think you did a first angel investment at the time. And I had another touch point, and we were starting to have that conversation. It was also the first time I had some money. I didn't have a family back then, so I had my first consulting salary. So what am I going to do with that money? And it was not so clear, really, what am I going to do with it? What's the impact I can have with it? How can I make money with it? And so that's a little bit how we started to look into private markets. And I think then we looked at two specific areas. One was really the SMB space, smaller companies that are looking for successions, etc. And the other one is really venture technology, and that was clearly where our passion was much, much stronger, and that's what we started there. And you're right, at the time, no one cared much about startups and venture in Europe.
Yeah. And coming to today, obviously the space has changed a lot. And the reason why I believe in private markets is because, as you know, I'm passionate about making sure that this planet survives, humans continue to thrive. And I think the way to influence that with capital is the private market. So for me, impact and change starts with how are you also investing. And then if you're doing what everybody else is doing in the public markets, we're not going to change the system. And I know you have really, really exciting portfolio companies and so many of those. And also, for example, in the quantum space where you're going with hardware, like I love all of this. But before we go more into what today Verve looks like, what drives you now? Like, what are you most passionate about? How do you even select this really game-changing, innovational portfolio companies?
Well, it all starts with this deep conviction, and we've talked about it already a little bit, that technology not only helps solving some and tackling some of the big challenges that we're facing, but it can actually make a very fundamental difference. And we all tend to go over that too quickly, but if we reflect a bit deeper on it, and that, if I may, also has to do with one of the experiences I made well before we started Verve Ventures, when I was 1.5 years in Africa, and where I saw that the invention and the rollout of mobile phone networks, for example, helped a whole society to leapfrog from not having access to financial services, for example, not having access to basic services such as health advisory, etc., to actually have that. Then you realize that there is really true and fundamental and very quick steps in improving things for everybody. And that's why, and it's just one example. There are many of those technology leapfrogging examples. You can Google it up and find many of those. But when you experience that firsthand, then you actually know the power of technology. And with that, I'm not saying that technology is the only thing that we need in order to tackle our problems such as climate change, etc. But it is certain. Without it, I think honestly that we're doomed. So we rather make the most out of it.
Of course.
Yeah.
And Lukas, what about you? What's like right now really like driving you to continue doing that kind of work you're doing?
That's a very broad question. I think at the center is really the power, the transformational power of tech. We see it every day. What we can, if we're trying to look a little bit into the future of what's coming, all the things that we can do with technology, and hopefully we're trying to do things the right way. I think that is fundamentally motivating for us. I think there's another great privilege we have in our job, and you talked about it a little bit, is this intersection of entrepreneurship, finance, and then the people aspect, where we are at this beautiful intersection where we are able to navigate, together with our investors, where we are investing capital. But we're also talking to interesting people every day. Like, entrepreneurs are extremely passionate people, extremely unique people as well. The same on the investor side. And of course, we're very proud about the team we have built. So we have this privilege that we can work on really, really interesting, groundbreaking things together with people that inspire us every day.
Yeah, and I had the privilege and the opportunity to meet many people within your team. And I can say like one of the things I love about Verve is that I find every single human I meet is really kind and just really decent, great human. And that's very rare in the financial wealth world. And I respect that a lot. And you can feel it in the energy too. So now that's...
Yeah.
Sorry?
That's nice to hear.
It's true. Otherwise I would have said...
And I think, if I may say, I think that's very important, especially in venture, because I think venture, because it's high risk, and you have to believe, you have to be an optimist. It's sometimes also, you meet also people that are so optimistic, or actually put things in a light that's maybe a little bit more than just optimistic. So you need to kind of be both forward-looking, but also very humble about what can go wrong, and be transparent with the investors about what can go wrong. And so to have that mix I think it all comes down to character, and that's what we're trying to curate here.
And it's very important because I have several hats on. Like sometimes I have the entrepreneur founder hat, so then you look at VCs in a certain way. Then I have sometimes representing the wealth owners, and is this venture capital firm, for example, one that's really doing good things for them. And then sometimes I have actually my corporate, let's call it, hat, like is this organization actually doing the right thing and working the right way and therefore can be recommended. And so when I look at an organization, for me, if it needs to fit all, and you see by the humans, how do they act, what is their energy, because then it tells you about the rest. Is this from a founder perspective someone you would trust? Is this from an introduction perspective someone you would trust? And then do they still operate the way you should to actually be successful? So I feel like this is very to learn for Verve. And then you already mentioned, optimist, realist. There's a lot of buzz about ventures. So I remember in my 20s, when I was still a lawyer, I was trying to understand what's the difference between venture and venture capital and private equity. And frankly, I had I promise you I wasn't stupid. I had several degrees. I was doing a good job and I really didn't understand.
Why it's two asset classes, right?
Yeah, it's now it's very simple. I'm like a company at a different stage and different kind of risk players get involved, but at the time I couldn't understand. And there was not so much venture at the time. Like family offices didn't care about it. Like no one really talked about venture. It was really something for others, maybe somewhere in the US, etc. Now there's so much buzz around it, also in Europe. How do you feel like the landscape has changed and where it's going? Because in certain instances it's still considered almost like risky and an alternative investment class, but in other instances it's considered kind of the future of how to invest. What's your opinion, having actually been so long in place?
Well, I can start perhaps with Lukas, with the types of companies that venture firms use to invest in and how this has evolved. But there are many other aspects, obviously, to the answer to regarding your question. We all might remember that when venture capital is not that old of a industry, actually, it dates back just a couple of decades, and it started only in the US, and it was a pretty capitalistic birth moment, I think, because it was ultimately about detecting stuff earlier, and therefore that would become big and make a lot of money, right? And you would obviously focus, if you would only prioritize that, you focus on bets or technologies that allow you to do this very quickly. And it was kind of coincided with the birth of the internet. So obviously there was this first wave of e-commerce companies, marketplaces, etc., all those things that scaled quickly using this fundamentally new technology at hand, right? And I think only in the last 10, 15 years, basically, when we also, or actually a bit later, we started, perhaps I think we were a bit leading there. I can say that without blushing. But I think it was really just in the last 10 years or so that venture capitalists started to tackle more fundamental problems and more complex technologies. On the one hand, because they had to, because, at some point, all the possibilities that the internet gave us were kind of used, right? There are very few niches left that you could actually make money with it based on these technologies. And on the other hand, there was obviously this confluence of also a mindset in the broader society. These are topics where, ultimately also the governments were willing to chip in and put money because everybody was realizing we will not solve things like the climate crisis by just going on the way we did. And we need to also acknowledge that we need to invest in these fundamental technologies to make a difference. So I think this is really one of the big transitions that happened in the VC industry in the last decades. What else?
Yeah, and I think in parallel, you have, private equity obviously benefiting a lot from standard playbooks in terms of buying companies, making them more efficient, bringing in the right kind of software to steer the companies, adding on it, like kind of using scale to drive margins. And I think there also the levers have moved more towards understanding where things are going. So even from a private equity point of view, what technology actually unlocks for your private equity investments is getting obviously more and more important. So, but I think where we are today, if you look at institutional capital, especially in family offices, especially in Switzerland, but also in Europe, I think they still are very much in this. We do private equity because we understand that produces profits today. We can extrapolate that. We feel safe within that. And venture still being very much something that they don't understand yet. And some of them obviously are pioneering into it. But obviously our conviction is that the power of technology will eventually be the more important force than the separation between what's private equity and what's venture. So if you want to be, leading in private markets, you have to understand technology and you have to understand it early.
Yeah. And do you think there's also a mind shift change that's needed, or is this just about like an educational shift, understanding it better?
Well, it certainly requires mind shift and education, and I think it will also just take time. I think obviously the most agile investor is always the private individual, right? And I think there you can see very clearly that there's extremely knowledgeable and smart investors already today. And I think if you're looking more to the institutional capital, there obviously are a number of pioneers, but also a very big mass of institutionals that are still kind of lagging behind.
And I like your question also, just to add on this, because I think the mind shift also is a little bit in actually starting, hopefully more and more people starting to have a really genuine interest in what you invest in. I mean, venture capital is so special. And so in this space, there's no investment without a deep interest from those investors in what these companies are doing, and also a deeper understanding of how these business models work, a deeper understanding and also about the negative, positive implications of such a business model. And all of those things, that's the complete opposite to, an investment, a bet as a trader on a screen in a company where your charts tell you that probably the value will go up. This is pure speculation. You can make money without having any interest and any passion for what you invest in. And I think that's the kind of mindset change that I hope we will see more and more, because it's actually shocking how many people still are in this old world and don't understand that without taking responsibility, to take another dimension, not just the interest, for actually where the money goes, we will not mobilize enough capital to make the change that we all want to have.
But sorry to jump in. I think for us, we always said money is a tool. It's not a purpose in itself. And I think there was this era where, it was always about preserving capital. That makes sense, and that's fine. But I think if you're just in this mindset of preserving, you're always a bit, driven by anxiety of something will slip away. You're not driven by what you can do, but how you can have an impact and that is bigger. Well, because you're kind of trying to, preserve. And I think in terms of mind shift required, I think that's where we'd love to have some asset owners think, hey, I have all this capital. What's the best thing I can do with it? Of course, part of it you're going to just preserve, but part of it you should do something with it.
Yeah, what I call expansion and actually growth.
Yeah.
And the reason why I ask this question is because, I've only worked for 2 decades, but when I started in wealth management, I thought I only met one profile of wealth owner, and that wealth owner would have exactly been preserving, staying kind of limited, small, secure, safe. And now I'm blessed that the majority of the individuals I speak to, they really care what happens to their money. They genuinely care where it goes and what effect it has, like what impact. And I don't even need to tell the sustainability impact, but what does it do? And I believe it's also because the profile of, so to speak, investor has changed and will change tremendously over the coming decades. One should not be, for example, involved at all. Like literally, if you found one, good for you. The interview after this interview, actually we're interviewing probably one of Switzerland's female most successful investors. And I'm so glad that they're role models like that. And I believe there will be more and more. But also, younger generations are getting more involved. When I used to be a lawyer in wealth management, I didn't have a client who wasn't older than 55, 60, 70, etc. come to me. Now when I talk to my peer group and also if we do the dance, it's a much younger generation, sometimes even 20-year-olds saying like, I have some responsibility with what I'm inheriting. I need to learn what to do about it. And so that's why I was asking you about the ventures, because I think we're going into a new direction. I think venture will become much more important because to your point, it's not just something on a screen. It's like, who is the founder? What are the founders? Why are they doing it? There's the elements of, just making financial gain, but then you can do other things. And I think that venture, what's super interesting and exciting is that they can actually have change, and there's a story, there's passion, there's impact. From your perspective, what are you excited about in this coming decades, and what are you maybe a little bit more worried about? And it can be broader than just for...
Can I add one more point to what you said before? I just had one thought, is because you mentioned education, and I think what's really important, if you are born into a family that has wealth, and there's a number of financial advisors around you, and historically these are, people who are very savvy in traditional asset classes. And it takes a lot of courage and time and education that you actually change the asset allocation. So before you just say, let's invest here and put my money at work in a way that I want, you have to break through all this, inertia where your advisors and just the allocation you have today is just sitting and telling you to keep things the way they are. So you're only going to do that if you're really convinced that you want to, and it makes sense to you. And I think that's where mind change, but also education is so crucial, because if you don't have that, you will simply not change.
Exactly. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Thank you for adding that point. So the future, I'm not sure Texas future, which in venture is, I'm sure, very always exciting, because you can go very high up, or like, who knows. So what are you excited about? What are you a bit more worried about for the coming decades?
Should we do the word part first so we get it out of the way? Because I much rather talk about the exciting opportunities. Honestly, the thing that I'm most worried about is the force, and it can be a very strong force. It had to do with actually what we discussed before, the strong force of preserving forces, and the big lobby that is behind, certain systematic ways this financial system and this economy is organized. And this might sound a bit selfish, but as long as we're in a world where not only the advisors to wealthy families, but also banks are kind of shying away from embracing, certain asset classes, and I'm not sort of talking about venture capital only, also private markets more broadly, as you said, then we have a problem, because the longer this is postponed, this transition towards an economy where more capital is allocated to places where there are the new jobs, new technologies that hopefully can contribute to solving problems are being created. This is obviously a problem, and the forces are strong. I'm mentioning this because it is something that probably both of us we thought would change quicker, and we're still just at the beginning of the journey, where the first couple of banks are waking up and coming and reaching out to us, etc. I wanted to have said that before we go into the exciting areas of venture.
And probably, there's a lot of talk about the dangers of AI, right? Obviously we have a lot of discussions also internally about, how to think about all of that. But I think fundamentally we are optimists. I think the world has proven that, and the human race as well, that they're able to adapt to shifts, also very tectonic shifts, and that, skills and jobs they change over time. So we think that, this will be the same part of this. It will be a big shift, but we're not worried about it. I think there's a lot of, also drama built up around it, which we just don't find productive in any way. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Because sometimes me too, I get into the drama of AI, the future of the workforce, etc., and it can be overwhelming. And I guess you see it really on a ground level also with the startups you invest in, what's realistic, what's not. Yeah. What are you more excited about? And I'll start getting into.
I can maybe start with, before you dive into topics, Liz. I think what I'm most excited about overall is that these technologies, they really have, the potential to, become really centers of gravity where we believe there's going to, this so much, they're really going to change the world in places, but also attract other companies and talent. So when we think about key technologies, one of the things we're obviously also working towards is how can we not just build a company here and sell it tomorrow and make good money with that, obviously that's also important, but how can we go further? How can we build companies that are so big and so successful that they become these centers of gravity where, new companies get acquired by them, talent is kind of flying around those companies. And for instance, how can we build the leader in quantum computing here in Europe or in Switzerland? How can we, build new leaders on the climate side? Like that's what actually excites us very much, on that level. And I think there's really a lot of opportunities in the room to do that. And I think that's a big passion that we have.
Yeah, can tell. Steffen, do you want to add something?
Well, okay, now the themes. So currently we're betting on 3 themes, and I will answer your question if there's one of them that excites me personally even more. There is one actually, but the 3 themes, and I'm excited about all of them, of course. The 3 themes we're currently betting on are the playgrounds of health and bio, future of computing that Luke alluded to, and climate and energy. These are very broad fields, I know. My personal pet field is the first one, health and bio. And I'm also excited to talk about it because obviously everybody knows that there are big breakthroughs being made right now in terms of technologies. But actually it's funny, in the sustainability impact community, some people actually tend to put this aside more quickly because they are, to be honest, perhaps you have a better answer why they are doing this, but I don't know whether it might have to do with the perception of how the pharma industry works and making just pharma even more successful. Others might be worried that, look, just becoming more healthy is not impact enough or whatever. But I think what many of those people don't understand, and now I give you my pitch why I'm so excited about health and bio, is first of all, technology allows us to make indications of health problems a real business that are small in terms of population being affected. So orphan drugs, etc., are traditionally something that cannot be or are hardly pursued by big pharma because it just doesn't pay. Technology allows to actually build drugs and still make money with it for few people that might suffer under this condition. A second thing is technology in the health space will include populations in the developing countries, in emerging markets, etc. That's something that without technology and these breakthroughs that we're seeing would not happen. And then thirdly, there are perhaps also these misconceptions that, for example, longevity is one of those big topics that we read a lot about, and I actually share the concern that of those that think, so what's the purpose in us all becoming 300 years old, etc., and become godlike creatures? That's certainly not something that drives me. And however, what people forget there is that many of the applications within this field just aim to ensure that the lifespans we have are lifespans we can live healthy longer. So ideally, we all become 100 years old, but we're suffering less time in the last years from these chronic diseases, etc., that we're all facing. So, and if I may add one more thing, I'm also fascinated. I'm not a biochemist like many in our team, but I became more and more fascinated by it because these technological breakthroughs are really, even compared to other fields, really huge. I mean, this is truly disruptive what's happening there. And we could go into more detail, but even though at Verve we're generally focusing on fundamental technologies, within health in particular, I think there's some even more fundamental stuff happening currently as we're speaking than in other fields.
Do you want to name some of the companies you're super excited about?
It's funny, right? That I have to think, but there are so many. That's the reason. Well, we can take Actia, for example. Have you come across Actia?
I've read about it.
You've read about it? Well, some of your listeners might actually know it because they have basically invented a technology, mainly an algorithm that allows your smartwatches, basically with existing technology, it doesn't need any different sensor, to measure your blood pressure continuously. And hypertension is actually one of the biggest killers that is kind of, they call it the silent killer, often undetected actually. And if we could turn a lot of people's smartwatches into something that could actually early on detect problems, then we're having a good example of what I mentioned before, that this is a cheap an affordable technology that could help even people that cannot afford it or have little means to invest in health to stay healthy longer.
Lucas, do you want to add something? If not, I'm going to move towards maybe one of my last questions.
I would probably not pick, like for me personally, not an individual technology or field. I'm more excited about the cross-cutting theme that, Steffen talked about, the internet and how kind of these centers where you had people working and building up expertise, they kind of grew very, very powerful in that field. And I think so much of our, happiness as Europeans, our wealth, our, being at the forefront of stuff just depends on us working on stuff and getting good on stuff that really matters for the next 50 years. Whether that's quantum or it's how to develop drugs using artificial intelligence. Like, it matters whether the next Novartis actually sits here or in the US or in China. It matters if we have the next quantum leader here or somewhere else. Not just because some people will make a lot of money, but because it's important for all of us. It has this massive implication. And also, I mean, when I talk about happiness, I think a lot of what we have today is driven by us having this fundamental layer of wealth. You don't need to be rich, but you have enough for us to just be, living a normal life, which is a massive privilege. So I think if we make sure that we are working on these important technologies, it's the most important thing. And it's fun. It's amazing. And that's kind of the thing that is for me more interesting than, okay, I'm all in on quantum. That's my thing. No, I mean, I studied computer science at some point. So right now, software is not the thing that drives me most.
Yeah. So for my last point, one of the features of Verve I like is that you have a very special also business model for venture capital, right? And you allow access more easily than some of the players who are like, unless you cross this huge wall, we want to allow you in. And I feel to this whole barrier of some people not entering yet, what would be like 3 points you would tell someone who is like maybe even younger or like maybe hasn't yet invested in venture, but is curious, like here's everybody else is investing. Like it's the whole fact that you're supporting entrepreneurs who are very passionate and want to change the world, right? I love that aspect, being, an entrepreneur. What would you say? I know you don't see that every day, but back in the day when you entered, you were also like the barriers of entry were high. How do we remove them so they say, you know what, maybe I should, contact these guys, learn about these companies, and not even put so much money maybe the first time down, but let's start and then build trust and continue. What would be the 3 items you would say start here or do that? It's not so scary.
I don't know if I have these 3 items. Let's see if there are 3. But to start with, since you mentioned the model, just very briefly for the listeners, I mean, traditionally, venture capital funds are organized as funds. And then when it comes to making direct picks, this is a privilege that they might offer to their LPs once they have invested in the fund. It's kind of the entry is limited by becoming a fund investor. And then you might be able, if you're big enough, to also chip in direct investments. We turned this around when we started. We said, look, perhaps there's a way, leveraging technology, to also allow building an individual portfolio with direct investments. And that's how we started. We added funds later because not everybody has the time and the passion or whatever to go really deep and build individual portfolios. So funds have become very important for us. However, that's kind of, we still have both ways or modes of investing. I think that's important, perhaps for your audience to understand. And now, why is this so important in the first place to be able to pick individual investments? Well, it goes back to what we've discussed 20 minutes ago. The closer you are as an investor with the stuff that you are interested in, the stuff that you feel responsible for, the problems this company tries to solve, etc., the stronger you create, hopefully, an impact. You start talking about it to your friends, your family, etc. When you have a fund in between, and nothing against funds, but you already have a certain intermediation, right? Because you then trust somebody else to do the right picks for you. Having said that, it is important to have people who really understand venture, because you can do a lot of things wrong, and therefore funds have their raison d'être. But when we talk about our special verviness at our firm, I think this is so beautiful that we allow this kind of direct experience, being very close to the individual companies.
And thank you for explaining that. It was very important. Lukas, anything you would like to have?
Points. Yes, indeed. It always has.
It was a very one report.
I think, like with everything, you have to start, right? And I think if you study technology, it's a little bit like in university. If you learn about accounting or legal concepts, at least that was my experience. I always found it boring. It was boring up to the point where you have your own company and you need to understand. If you don't understand, it matters. And I think it's the same with investing. That's the point. You put money in, and then you start to engage with the topic in a whole different way. It can be small sums. It can be 10,000 francs. But get started. That's when you learn.
I think that was a very amazing way of explaining it. So we need to slowly wrap up because we're at time. But is there anything I haven't asked you would still like to share with me? Or is there any closing remarks you would like to add?
Well, actually, I liked your closing remark, because you've got to start somewhere, and it's a nice combination with your previous question, what you would recommend a young person. Well, yeah, make a first investment, and then this magic happens that Lukas just explained. And it doesn't take a lot of money, and it doesn't need to be a big chunk of money in the first place. But you'll find out once you do it.
I want to thank you both for your time.
It's been fun.
Yes. I'm very passionate about what you do, because I also seen some of your portfolio companies, know some of the founders even personally. So I've seen it from all perspectives. So I'm grateful for the work you do. From my perspective, I think that's how we change the world. So that's why it's so meaningful. And I thank you for your time today. And can't wait to see what the future brings.
Yes, I'd be very happy to do this again. It's a lot of fun, and I think you're asking the right questions. So let's reconvene.
Thank you very much. Thanks.